Well, welcome everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started on our final track of the day for Intro to Crypto. It looks like everybody's pretty much close enough. This is going to be more conversational, so the closer you are to the front, the better. We have two wonderful speakers. They're going to be talking about DAOs and how they affect our Catholic community. My name is Jim Friend. I've been the host of this track today, and I'll be the host tomorrow. I'm a member of a firm called Changing Our World, and we provide fundraising and service for nonprofits in that way. So I'm going to introduce Eddie Cullen and Karl Kilb from Crestsite Innovation. They're sponsors of this conference. Eddie is the founder and CEO of Crestsite Innovations. He is a devout Catholic and a technology entrepreneur who brings more than 15 years experience of innovation and enterprise-level research and development, working with a variety of organizations from Fortune 500 companies to nonprofits and startups. Karl Kilb is the chairman of Crestsite Innovation. He is an entrepreneurial leader and corporate lawyer with more than 30 years of experience in building and monetizing intellectual property, including multimedia content and technology. He brings a lifetime of dedication to the Catholic faith, leveraging years of experience developing technology to build Web 3.0 and other solutions for the Catholic community's faith-based initiatives. He's also a leader in developing new cybersecurity solutions and strategies. An interesting career note, as I was looking at his bio, Karl, prior to becoming a lawyer in 1995, he was a broadcast journalist with CNBC, Financial News Network, 1010, WINS Radio, Bloomberg, and other media outlets. You can learn more about Karl and Eddie from their bios in our program, but please welcome them. Thank you so much for coming, guys.
Hey, thanks. All right, hopefully everybody can hear us okay. And we're very informal, and we have a relatively small group, so probably great to jump in at any time if you have any questions. But maybe we'll just briefly introduce ourselves. Karl Kilb is my name, and the company is actually pronounced Crestsite. I realize it's not the easiest name to pronounce, but it actually. Eddie, maybe introduce yourself briefly and talk about the origin of the name.
Yeah, so my name's Eddie Cullen from New York. I've been working on Catholic causes for mostly my whole life and early stage technology companies. But Crestsite is in the book of Genesis, meaning to increase, to grow. If you're familiar with the Sistine Chapel, where God touches Adam, et Crestsite is one of the first words that is there. So it's a play on words with the Genesis block and blockchain, but also the book of Genesis. So there's dual meaning, Catholic and crypto.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Eddie. So as Jim mentioned, I spent most of my career at Bloomberg. Hard to believe I got hired over 30 years ago by Mike Bloomberg. So I have a long history with all types of technology, and I joke it was kind of like Web 0.0 when we built out the Bloomberg terminal network back in the late 80s and early 90s, because it really did predate the internet, which was really late 90s. And you think about all the things that have happened since then, I feel like it's kind of been a natural career progression to get to this point with what Eddie and I are now doing with all things Web3, blockchain, and crypto. So our topic today is DAOs. So what's a DAO? So trying to maybe start off simplistically with specifically what a DAO is, and then we can kind of delve into maybe some more questions like how DAOs can be effective, in particular in the Catholic community. So a DAO, DAO, is simply a decentralized autonomous organization. So what does that mean? Technically, it's a legal structure that has no central governing body. So right away, that sounds kind of bizarre when you think about me being a lawyer myself and having worked at many corporations and thinking about how corporations are typically governed. The idea of no central governing body certainly sounds really out there. Members share a common goal to act in the best interest of the entity. So practically, how does this happen? If the DAO has a bottom-up entity structure and no central authority, members of the DAO typically own some sort of an interest in the DAO through tokens, for example, and the members can vote on initiatives for that entity. Smart contracts are implemented for the DAO, and the code governing the DAO's operations is publicly disclosed, so everybody is on the same page and knows what's happening. The DAOs are member-owned communities, no centralized leadership. They're made possible by blockchain technology. And the DAOs, again, are used to allow for a bottoms-up management approach. In many cases, virtual currencies make use of this decentralized status to attain some levels of privacy and security, and those levels are typically unavailable to standard currencies and their transactions. And DAOs are relying heavily on what are called smart contracts. These are logically coded agreements that dictate decision-making based on underlying activity on a blockchain. So in effect, the results are coded in, if you will, rather than having some centralized hierarchy that is able to make the decisions. And maybe a good idea, Reddy, if we go through some specific issues on where DAOs come into play and how they can have a practical impact.
Yeah, so I think hearing all these buzzwords throughout the day, DAOs and blockchains and crypto, I think it's important to realize that it's just technology, it's software. And at the end of the day, smart contracts are driving a lot of these new different types of implementation techniques within technology. NFTs, as for an example, everyone hears those buzzwords. They don't know what they necessarily mean. It's really just a proof of concept for smart contracts. And we're going to continue to move forward with smart contracts in different forms and shapes. And one of them is community building. So if anyone works with a school or works with a church, generally you're building a community, so to speak, right? And sometimes there might be issues that people disagree upon. And you can actually develop a smart contract that is automated code. If you look at a table where you are, if you're sitting with 3 people, 4 people, somebody might want to vote on something and not want the other person to know what you want for lunch, right? Maybe someone wants a hamburger, maybe somebody wants a salad. But a smart contract can automate that process, so it makes it a little bit more efficient. And I think in the practical uses of finance and revenue, you could also say that it makes things a little bit more cost efficient. If you have to go through a voting process for 6 months, say with a co-op building, or there's trade associations trying to make a real-time transaction across border, or alumni associations, maybe there's a vote on a capital campaign and what to do with that capital on a campus. One of the schools that we work with is Fordham University, and Fordham, one thing that we have done which we think is great, is remember, we're still in the early days of the tech. I heard something funny earlier today in a talk that people are saying it's the top of the first inning with blockchain, and someone said, I was at a talk earlier today, I think with Cullen Financial, where they said, we're actually sitting in the parking lot waiting for the game to start, right? Like we're not there yet, and we won't be. But we are making incremental, steps forward in this technology. And one of the things that we've helped pioneer is identity management. If anyone has a crypto wallet, that's what you use to transact. Very simple. You have a wallet in your pocket. That's where you hold most of your assets. And some of those things are 40-digit characters. I don't know about you guys, but when I go and copy and paste a 40-digit character, I'm probably going to mess up, right? And that's just the reality of human error. So what we've done is, how do you identify yourself within a DAO? So you might have Eddie.Fordham, or Eddie.JPMorgan, or Eddie.so-and-so. And that's important because I think we need to identify ourselves within DAOs. When we look forward to other use cases, I think public work projects, social impact investments. And I think Catholicism produces a natural community to vote on different projects. Maybe there is something infrastructure-wise we want to work on in Haiti in terms of getting water to the poor. Or maybe we want to do a project in Africa to bring Wi-Fi to a community. So DAOs can give you that possibility to do on-chain voting, to do sorts of things that you couldn't necessarily do, I think, with our current system of Web 2 technology. And then it also produces a ledger of those votes. So if we really want to do a project, we can do a vote and it's recorded. One of the blockchains we work with is called XDC Network. So they're a public-private blockchain network that is focused necessarily on trade finance. And the cool part about that community is to get a grant, you can't just go to a single source and go, hey, I need a grant of capital. No, you have to take a proposal, you have to propose it to the community, and they have to vote. And sometimes it's no, sometimes it's yes. So it's a little bit more of a democratic way to, democratizing how we can vote on processes. And that could be at a very large scale with, doing a large trade finance product between 2 countries and having cross-border settlements, to smaller projects. Maybe we want to build a ramp at our local parish. And we've raised, but maybe somebody else in the parish wants to build a statue of Mary, right? And there's $100,000 in capital, and you want to do one of the projects, but you're divided. So you can use that technology to make those votes and have that as a ledger for yourself. So it gives those capabilities. And at the end of the day, these DAOs are generally run by smart contracts, just like I said earlier. So they're just automated ways to make agreements on the blockchain. And that's what we're looking at in terms of how DAOs can work. So decentralized autonomous organizations, what I can suggest as you go through this conference and you go through learning about this technology, do not get caught up in the buzzwords. Don't get caught up in NFTs. Don't get caught up in Bitcoin. Don't get caught up in DAOs. Get caught up in how the technology works. And for the most part, things are not going to, in my eyes, drastically change. Your app on your phone is going to look like an app. And there's a terminology that I will use right now that we're hearing. It's called a DApp, so a decentralized application. The front end on your phone is going to look the same. The things that are on your phone will look the same in practice in front of you. But the back end will just be different. The code will be a little bit different and a little bit more efficient. And we can use those processes to really make, I just think, things better. And I like to think technology can make our life better, but will not replace certain things. So in practice, it's really taking large groups, sometimes smaller groups, to make a decision. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Constitution DAO that happened a little bit earlier. That people wanted to buy the Constitution and people wanted fractional ownership of that Constitution, which I think is very interesting, right? But then on the other side, there was a DAO that tried to buy the Dune book. I don't know if you guys heard of this. They brought the Dune book, and they didn't realize that even though you brought the original copy of the book, you don't own the copyright to that, right? So there are still things that we need to fine-tune and figure out, but it at least enables people to do things. The funniest things I've heard so far in the last couple of months, and this just can't happen because the NFL doesn't do it, someone wanted to open Commanders DAO to buy the Washington Commanders, right? Let's get a bunch of people to pull in some crypto and buy the organization so we can large-scale raise huge sums of money, but a couple of things. One thing that I do really like that is it allows the everyday person to get involved on things that they maybe could not get involved in before. Whether it's $100,000 in investment, whether an institution can make a $100,000 investment on a property, this allows for people to make $5, $10, $20 investments in properties and then have voting rights comparable to that. So I think it just is democratizing the way we vote on things. It's democratizing the way we use smart contracts. And I do believe that DAOs, even though they are still very early in development, can be beneficial to the church. I just see very, very big use cases for Catholicism, whether that's social impact, whether that's parish fundraising, whether that's alumni associations at Catholic universities doing a capital campaign. So there's many different use cases where this is applicable, I think, in our own lives.
And you think about historically how things have morphed in technology. It was over 30 years ago when I started at Bloomberg, people were still using handwritten tickets to trade. People were still on the floor of the stock exchange yelling at each other for trades. So you only had a handful of people to potentially trade with, the people that were in earshot, and then you documented your trade with a handwritten ticket that had to be handed to yet somebody else, and ultimately it was a very inefficient process. And then it was replaced by electronic trading, the opportunity to reach many people instantly, get best execution because you had a much wider range of people that could be a counterparty on a trade. And then when everything was documented digitally, it gave you a keystroke by keystroke audit trail so that you knew things were actually accurate. And then if you remember kind of the history of trading, we were able to stop trading just in fractions and get into decimalization and trade in increments of a penny and get much closer to what the market really was at. So now you fast forward to today, and you could actually have a very similar situation where everything is documented on blockchains, and we've heard so much today about kind of replacing trust with truth. Mm-hmm. And it was even nice to hear Mark in the last session next door talk about using Jesuit educational methodologies to kind of drill down and just keep debating and discussing until you get to what the truth is. And actually, with a DAO, it could create a form of voting and governance that can actually be anonymous and get to a point where the results are kind of baked in to the smart contract code, which would also potentially eliminate a lot of the waste that's spent on lobbying. Also a line I like that Mark used next door was he basically said lobbying is just a fancy word for corruption. At the end of the day, how effective would lobbying or, in effect, paying people to do your bidding, you might eliminate a lot of that if all of a sudden everything was done anonymously through smart contracts with results that were kind of already baked in based on what the governance voted on.
Right, and I want to give two real-life examples of what we're doing. I think this is helpful, and I think also ways you can actually use this in your organization. One, as I mentioned, we're working with Fordham. We are onboarding 50,000 different users within the community with their domain name, which will enable some identity verification. Mostly what's called a multi-signature process. If anyone who's familiar with crypto or wallet making, using a wallet in transactions, the identity of the person will be verified via their phone, but also be verified via the servers at Fordham, and that enables people to participate, hopefully, in future votes or projects that maybe happen on campus, right? And maybe that's the school wants to do, a capital project on campus. Maybe there's a real estate. Maybe there's a new dorm that needs to be built. Maybe the students want a different meal plan structure, right? And those are things that can be enabled through decentralized autonomous organizations within a school entity. Another one that we're working on right now, which I think is fascinating, we are working with someone known as the homeless hero. He's in New York City, and we've been working with him to uplift him. And one of the models that we're working on is actually standing up a building in New York City next year where we can provide housing, hopefully, for low-income veterans, homeless, give them an opportunity to get housing. If you think of the voucher system, where housing authorities provide capital, sometimes it takes 6 months for that money to get to a landlord. That's really difficult, right, when you're looking at balance sheets. So, in having a building, if we have a smart contract in fractional ownership, and people get shares of that building, they're able to live there, there can also be voting mechanisms, almost like a co-op within that building, right? And that's a DAO, that's a simplified DAO structure built into the code. So the one thing I will say is always remember that it's code and that it's software, and then it's flexible in how you build that for your organization. For me, I'm thinking about the future. I do think there will be softwares that you can subscribe to for your organization, right? And say, okay, I want a DAO voting mechanism for everyone in my community to vote on different projects, and you can use that, right? Or maybe it's not as formal as that; it's informal. You just have a DAO where you're voting on something very particular to something minor in your organization, right? So those are two use cases that we feel we've been working on that has been a representative of DAOs. Of course, and it doesn't come without issues, right? I think a lot of people have questions, well, if it's a community voting, who's the single governing body making the decision, right? Doesn't someone have to make one final decision and sign off on stuff? And I think that's really been working out right now, right? I think people are working on those mechanisms, to figure out how the community can operate, and you can even put that to a vote. So I would just recommend, going on different blockchains and looking at DAOs that they have. As Mark said next door, sometimes, you'll see layer ones like XDC communicating with Solana, Solana communicating with Ethereum, and sometimes your voting mechanisms may be built in NFTs. You might get an NFT or a smart contract of maybe it's a picture of Mary from your parish. You get that picture, 3,000 people in your parish have it, and that's how you know that they have voting rights within that DAO, right? So there's ways and things to do that you can actually provide people with the opportunity to vote through token holding, and certificates of that token, so to speak, to vote.
Any questions for us? Sure.
Where's the DAO hosted? Is it Ethereum, these end up being the underlying structure, or is it independent, nodes and companies that provide hosting for these things? How's that going to work?
I think it varies, right? Like the network that we work with, XDC, it's, I don't know how you're familiar with this stuff, but you have layer ones, and then layer ones are generally the blockchain that you build on. Most DAOs usually are that layer 2 that are built in. So almost, XDC for us is good because we work within public and private settings. So not every blockchain is a one-size-fits-all. So we have the public network for public engagement, but there's also private parts to the blockchain, because if you start thinking about students and maybe possibly medical records or private documents that you don't want out in the public, you want to have both states. So I think it's really on what your organization is trying to accomplish. If you're trying to have high transaction volume, maybe use Solana, right? If you want to have Nothing without smart contracts. Maybe you have Bitcoin with something built on top of it. So it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish, and it's not a one-size-fits-all. So you really got to go, what's my use case, and then what am I using for that use case?
Sure.
So as far as the infrastructure for this now, I mean, there aren't like Salesforce for DAOs. I mean, you have to custom code user interfaces for students to access all of this. I mean, is that where it's at now? For these are custom applications right now?
I mean, there's some organizations, I can't remember the name of this one, but some have raised venture capital. Like there's some that are like centralized and actually.
I heard something called Kilb. Have you ever heard
So not familiar with Guild, but I'm thinking of a venture capital DAO that would, took on some money from Andreessen Horowitz. They're actually there to democratize venture capital. Usually if you're like a limited partner, you invest only $100,000, $200,000. But for the everyday person, maybe they only want to invest $20, $30. So they've actually created software where you can just invest in that DAO. And that's more of a traditional sort of model. But some of this code is copy and paste, right? But yeah, it is very early still. So these smart contracts, you're not going to really find a SaaS type solution yet that I think is really evolved. DAOs are 1, 2, maybe 3 years old. And people will argue, yeah, but it goes back to 2014. But for me, it's got to be operational. Like there has to be real tech behind it. So it's still very early days in it. And I think this is one of the fields. So here's what I think is going to happen. I think one DAO will emerge. Almost how we had the NFT bull cycle. NFTs were around for a long period of time, and then they came mainstream. And I think that's going to be the next cycle for blockchain DAOs. One DAO will come out and do really well, and then everyone will kind of converge on it. But that's just another proof of concept for smart contracts, again. So yeah, to your point, there's some platforms that have raised venture capital that exist, but if you're really looking for a custom solution, you might have to build that out.
And like you said earlier, Eddie, it's probably likely that there will be somebody that will fill the void as a software as a service solution, come up with kind of a generic DAO structure that can be tailored to your specific needs, and then you can white label it for your community.
Yeah, and some chains are mature, and there's some chains like have some of that, but there's some chains that just don't, right? They're very early in their life cycle. XDC is a little bit more. They've been a blockchain, I think, since 2016, 2017. They're just getting their DAO technology together. It's going to launch next month, right? Whereas you might look at Ethereum or Solana, and they might have some more mature solutions. But as a Catholic organization, well, I guess we're post-merge, you might not want to have used Ethereum because the gas fees were so high, or there might have been energy concerns, right? So the tech is evolving, and it's just, like I said, it really does depend on your use case.
Can you have, you mentioned governance, I mean, it seems like you can have a hybrid. You can have a smart contract that there could be one entrepreneur that sets up a DAO where they have a leadership role, almost like Linus Torvald with Linux, and have members where they have the confidence that they have a role in the decisions, but there is one leader. Is that?
Yeah, that's possible. Yeah, if you're going, I'm going to start a DAO, and I'm going to sign off on this, and we're going to go start, we're going to raise $50 million for Catholic billboards across America. I'm going to be the person that leads that and signs off on that and makes a decision. The one thing that the blockchain and crypto community usually rejects is when you're not transparent. And when you're not transparent,
Full transparency.
right? Yeah,
The leader.
we're the leader. We're going to do it this way. That's okay, right? It's not a one-size-fits-all sort of technology, I think, at this point.
Sure.
Yeah, could you just walk through the steps of setting up a DAO? I mean, so often it's, but just for someone who's brand new, maybe like a very small scale, maybe something you want to do with your small community, small company, what would be the steps that you would go through?
Yeah, I would, and I'm a traditional type person. I honestly think take out a piece of paper, take out, what are you trying to accomplish? What's the goal? If the goal is to build a handicap ramp, for parishioners to come into your church, sit down and say, okay, that's the vision for it. And then I would also, and this is what I did early on when I learned about blockchain, go read about layer ones. There's probably about, in my eyes, about 100 of them that are pretty solid, but they're different in use cases, right? Like,
Define layer one.
yeah, layer one is just, it's the base layer of the blockchain, basically, right? So that's actually what you build into. So you have layer one, and then a layer two, like for instance, as Crescite. Let's use Crescite. Crescite is a layer two built on top of a layer one that is the XDC blockchain. Other use cases, if you're familiar with the NBA, I think it was NBA Top Shot, I think that's the name of it, the NBA NFTs, they were layer 2 built on Flow blockchain, right? So you build into a blockchain based on the use case that you want, and then it's really different. Like the blockchain we built on is kind of built for trade finance, kind of built for cross-border transactions. Flow might be a little bit more for art and transactions of that level. So I would take those steps. Go, okay, what's my use case? What chain am I looking for? Do I want to do a custom development, which might take a lot longer? Or do I want some sort of rinse and repeat easy model that I can use existing software? But you do need a smart contract, or it's not a DAO, right? Like you can, we could all sit around here and vote on something with pieces of paper and put a ballot in, and that could be okay. But if you really want it to be a decentralized autonomous organization, you need a decentralized technology, that builds that. So step 1, what's your plan? 2, like what layer 1 am I looking for? And you can go research too. There's places you can get advice on that. And then 3, pick your software and implement, but then inform the people of the community that we are going to go to a vote. Here's how we're going to do governance around this. And that's how I would approach it generally, if that makes sense. I'm glad to talk after too, if you want to.
Sure.
How are you going to reconcile a DAO with canon law? In other words, governance of a parish is given specifically to the pastor. It's not even given to the pastoral council. Pastoral council is advisory only. So if you're going to create a DAO that's going to be bringing good services or a structure to a parish, how is that going to be reconciled with the canon law?
May I tag on to that question? Just by example, you can speak to this. It was involved in the first endowment fund for Catholic school in this diocese, and it was wicked. And in fact, the end goal, because of canon law, the nature of an endowment fund is, permanently reserved money for use of a board to determine its purpose. And it would be direct opposite to what we would see in canon law, which is the bishop's right to make ultimate determinations on all funds. And we worked our tail off to try to get it across. Every Catholic school needs that endowment. In the final analysis, it couldn't be worked out. It was funky language that ended up, we called it an endowment fund, and it was, and the cool thing about it was that the parish could borrow from it if it had to. But the bishop could borrow from it if he had to, and ultimately the bishop could take the money if he wanted to. So you're right on about canon law, but that's a great question.
No, I was going to say the rules are not set in stone, right? So if a pastor is leading the DAO, then that's okay, right? You can write your own rules to it. It's decentralized, but if we're going to follow canon law, you can, right? Like that's okay. You can match the technology to canon law, and that's a perfectly okay thing, right?
But fundraising in the name of the Catholic Church would be even a legal issue, wouldn't it? Even before it's a problematic issue with where's that money held, reserved, and who's in control of it. I mean, I can see it as a problem. I love your idea.
I mean, there might be, so this might be a use case, and you might appreciate this. So there is actually a software called Endowment. So if you want to look it up, it's ENDAOMENT. That's more of like a, I don't want to say a white label type solution. It's a little bit simpler, but yes, absolutely, right? Like you can get on there and put your EIN number, and then you have parishioners donate stuff, but maybe the rules are built that the pastor makes the decisions on that, right? So
or maybe the DAO provides results and input to the pastor, but ultimately the pastor still has either veto power or final decision power, but you become a very informed pastor because you've been given this data on how your parishioners would actually like to see you allocate the funding.
right,
We had that during this last, cycle where the bishops are now, down there taking all this information in national from Catholics right down to the parish level.
And the other thing is, in New York, schools are now becoming academies to protect the assets from going to pay these lawsuits. So it's, I just don't know if that's.
So you could also have another option being, a foundation that's dedicated to. But the DAO controls the decisions on, yep, we're going to support this, support that. So You know, it could be not a follow canon law, it's just the, you know, parishioners and or people that want to support that parish could have the ability to decide.
And there could be, exactly, I was just going to say that. I was going to say it could be a process of discernment for the pastor too. The pastor goes, you know, we've raised this capital, I'm leaning 80% this way, but I'm still unsure. And I want to get opinions, and it might not be a vote, it might just be, I'm trying to get opinions from the parishioners, and I'm going to aggregate those opinions and make my, you know, final decision, so to speak. It's more of just being able to aggregate that information, but also here's what I think it's interesting. If you ever think of our current Web 2 and Web 3, it's also a safer way to get at that information. You know, if 100 people give insight and comments to things, I always use the cookie jar analogy for Web 2 and Web 3. If there's a cookie in a jar, and I was the only one in this room, and I went and grabbed that cookie, it's pretty easy for me to get it. Now, if I put that jar right there on that table and I go and grab it, you guys are going to go, what are you doing? Right? I'm watching you take that cookie. And that's what blockchain technology is. It gives you that ability to understand transparently what's happening and not having that data manipulated. There's no single source of failure. So if there's 100 comments on what to do with the money that the pastor raised, what if it's hacked and 40 people, now the comments are changed? Blockchain allows for that not to happen. It's a little bit of a safer way, you know, and that's, you know, at a broad stroke, if we really got deep into the tech, you know, explain it, but that's you know, how it's useful.
So for a parish, it could merely be used, not necessarily as a DAO, but blockchain could be used to make transparent, theoretically.
Right. Yeah, depending on what the use case is, right? And that's why DAO is such a broad terminology, which I always tell people, don't get caught up in the terminology, get caught up in the tech. Like, okay, it allows for, you know, if, you know, I think of capital campaigns that last for a year or voting processes that happen for 6 months, maybe you can bring that down a little bit and save some costs or something, right? You know, and you can use the tech for that.
Sure.
So I'm curious about your thoughts about the governance structure in terms of historically, we've had a tremendous situation in which once you get a significant amount of money put together in some sort of a foundation or an endowment, ultimately all institutions do get captured by the hard left, right? Because the political structure at the top sooner or later gets captured. And I'm just curious as to whether you know, I'm with Ave Maria University, and
Yeah.
ultimately the idea is to try to keep the authentic Catholic identity, but we don't have much of a track record in the history of the Catholic universities in this country, for example. Does this give an opportunity for a better management of that governance, do you think, in terms of the management over a period of years?
Personally, I think yes, because I think you could have anonymous voting of the relevant community without necessarily having public lobbying. And you get to a result that reflects what the vast majority of the community thinks is the right thing to do.
Yeah, and I think you can design that smart contract for, like I said, you can design the smart contract for whatever you want it to do. If you're, I think of, Ave Maria, I'm trying to think of other, universities that have been, a little bit more recent, maybe, and this one's not Catholic. It's, I think Olin Engineering has been around 20 years or something, right? Like, you look at this, maybe you want votes from student body, faculty, they want to give a vote, and you want to get that hard feedback, but some people are a little nervous and scared, and they don't want to give that back. You can allow that mechanism to happen, get those votes back, then you can make a decision. But yes, it'll do a couple things. I think it'll give you more efficiency on your governance. I've worked with schools a lot too, and I know you're at Ave Marina. There's always differing opinions, and that's great, right? But maybe you can make some of those voting mechanisms a little bit more efficient. Like, okay, guys, we're going to come in for a meeting. There's 15 of us. Everyone has an opinion. We're going to use this software to do a vote, and it's going to log the vote, and we can track our progress over the next 6 to 8 months, right? It's just, trust and transparency is what the blockchain is usually about, and you can do that, and that can be around anything. It doesn't have to be a capital campaign. It could be, hey, we want to do we really want to do a prayer service for St. Francis of Assisi, or maybe we want to do it for St. Margaret Clitheroe or something, right? Like, and that's just a personal thing, and maybe the student clubs could use that as a way to discern their own opportunities for events and other things. So,
sure.
So what stops corruption within the DAO, even though I know that it's one vote per person and no really formal governance, what stops
Well, I guess, in life, people will always have the opportunity to try to sway others to vote any way they see fit. But the governance structure is what provides the real accountability. So at the end of the day, it should be an anonymous voting structure that produces a result that can be acted upon in accordance with the smart contract.
Or maybe an institution wants to avoid kind of that anonymity. Like I said, the smart contract's flexible. That's one side. Maybe the other side is everyone has an identity and you know who that person is. And maybe there's mechanisms that person is not voting on the next 3 projects or something. It's really hard. It depends on the use case of what it is. But I will say, comparable to our current social media platforms, Web3 allows for you to own your own data, right? Your data is not being sold off to advertisers. Your data is not being compromised on any of these platforms. I feel like we have a problem with bots and things that aren't real. And blockchain will allow for us to know what's real and what's really not, because everything's recorded, whether it's a transaction, whether it's a vote. And go to a website which will give you perspective on this. Go to, I think it's Blockscan. Blockscan and Etherscan, and they're pretty much these scan platforms that literally you can see every transaction that's happened based on the 40-digit code, right? You can literally see everything that's happened with a block over time. So you can find out, maybe there's 50 people in a vote, one person votes, and you find out that person's not part of the community but somehow got in, and you're like, well, we know by the code that they're not there, and that's what Mark in the other room was talking about, banking and other things, that's why it's tough for people, because there's trust and transparency. You can't necessarily hide behind something. It's right there in the open. And as a community, you might decide that person can't vote anymore, right? It really depends. It really, really depends on the use case, but there's ways to prevent that.
Sure.
Is it possible to create a DAO or have a DAO? I'm involved with one that I'm working with kind of sideways for a couple of months now, in the earlier part of the year. But is it possible to have something like that without it being a token-gated protocol? Because how would you then be able to justify who has votes, who purchased more to have more votes? Because you could have, somebody that wants to become the de facto leader and could, just through whatever means purchase 25% of the vote, and now you really got to swing vote. It's not really even a bad thing, because maybe you should be, you bought in that much, you believe in it that much, maybe you do deserve a more heavy swinging vote.
Fascinating question, right? And these are the moral questions that I think we should answer over the weekends like this.
Maybe the pastor gets 5 more votes,
Right, and these
Or
are
maybe he starts with votes.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
He's got
Right.
20% anyway, so that's going to be a big swing.
These are the moral, ethical questions that I've really kind of discerned with over, and I think we're starting to see a change in this. I don't know if you're familiar with proof of stake or proof of work. Proof of work was generally, at its easiest concept, or people were mining, and if they got 51% of the network to confirm, then a new Bitcoin was created, right? That's at the simplest form. Proof of stake, I don't know, and this is a moral question for you guys, not necessarily me stating. Do you guys agree that if someone owns, hundreds of millions of more tokens than one person, should they have more voting rights? And that's what proof of stake is. You're staking your tokens. So say I have 100 million tokens, and each one of you has one. And we get on a voting platform, and it's called staking. It's like you place your tokens somewhere, and I get 100 million votes. That's called proof of stake. But here's what's fascinating, and we've had this in our white paper. It's something that we call the human rate of return, or proof of humanity, I like to call it, is why aren't we giving credit to maybe the mother that's home taking care of 2 kids, right? And they get, they're adding to the economy of some sort. What I mean by that is we're starting to see new proofs that are focused around community or humanity or the impact on society. And that's a very interesting concept. It's very new. It's coming out in the next 2 or 3 years. So that's a moral question that I would want you to walk away from this is proof of stake, if I have more tokens than somebody, is that okay, that I have more power over a certain vote or protocol? Or should we be judging, or not judging, should we be providing other ways for people to get more votes? Or is it one-to-one? Right? And I don't think these questions have necessarily been completely figured out, but I think we're getting there. I think we're starting to. So.
Would that type of thing vary when every DAO?
It would, yeah. It would, yes.
I mean, it's reminiscent of some of the discussion about small dollar donations in politics that, Bernie Bernie Sanders has small donors, that's a better, situation. And then you might have a DAO where theoretically a token is $100 and only one person can buy one token, and it's an egalitarian situation where someone just can't come in and buy 100. I mean, it seems like it's endless, the possibilities are.
And that's why it's important for your DAO use case, write the rules that you want in place. And it might be one central authority that's a pastor. It might be a parishioner leading a group to bring people for a Christmas party together, right? And they're trying to figure out what they're going to buy for the Christmas party. Then it allows for people to vote on things and they don't have to get together. Think about in your own life, right? When you go maybe to a parish meeting or an alumni meeting, sometimes getting there physically, if you have a family or somewhere else, might be tough, right? And this may allow for that voting to happen. And look, I'm one for humanity and the incarnation and making sure we all get together. I think that's really important. But sometimes there's limitations to that because of our own lives, so it can make voting a little bit easier, right? So it really depends on the use case and the rules that you write that are for that DAO. And then is it a DAO that continues forever, or is it a one-time thing on a one-time vote on a Christmas party or a capital project, right? So look, morally, I think you have to discern yourself. To ask a question, you can do it without it being token gated, I think, in my eyes. You can still use a layer 1 blockchain technology and not use tokens as your almost like your badge of honor. Like I have so many more tokens than you, I get 80% of the vote. Is it really a vote? And that's just, like I said, it depends on the use case. So.
And if the sponsor getting funded in the DAO treasury, then everyone's
Right.
having to get more say.
Right.
Kind of flips it on zero all the time.
And there's been situations of that, right? People taking advantage of communities. They might go and try to get a grant over and over and over again. And they might be blocked from putting out another proposal. So there's things in there, and we can get into the technology like almost developing REST APIs that have certain voting things in it or certain rules and mechanisms native to your organization in some way.
Is your business model providing these services? Is that
Part of it, yeah. We try to work with people on Web3, use cases. Ranging from, working with Fordham on identity verification and putting identities out there to, like a personal project that I'm doing is, the history of the Jesuits. So it's it's not necessarily a DAO, but it's, putting out tokens on all different moments of Jesuit history. So the superior generals and things like that, and people in the classroom putting tokens out. But yeah, we do offer those services where we can help kind of bring DAOs to fruition. But it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. But yeah, it's part of what we're trying to build as a community. And we don't think it's a one-size-fit-all for every Catholic community. We think there's things that will happen at a university that might not necessarily happen at a parish, that might not happen with a social impact project in Africa with a parish. It's going to be a little bit different, but hopefully combine all of those interests around one common goal, which is the mission, I think, of our church. So. All right.
Anybody else, any questions?
All right.
Karl, this is a really compelling conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.